Hello everyone, this is Professor Robert Solis and welcome to this video lesson. We're going to be talking about structures, and in this particular lab you're going to create a car database. So what's going to happen is the user will click the file menu option, click open, and then a dialog will open up. The user will open up a text file that includes the data for 5 cars. The data will include, for each of the cars, make, model, miles per gallon, cylinders, and horsepower. So as soon as the database is opened, you'll see that the first record will display, and these buttons over here represent the next button and the previous button, and this is the record counter. The first record, we're going to call that record 0, and we'll continue from there. So let's go ahead and create this. Now you'll see that there are various parameters that we need to abide by. Let's go ahead and read through those. So for the user requirements, it says create a program that allows the user to enter automobile data and store it in a text file as a database of 5 cars. Alright, the user must have the ability to open a file dialog and load the text file containing the automobile data for 5 cars. Finally, the user shall have the ability to modify and automatically save the data in the text file that was selected in the file dialog. For the software requirements, we have to consider the following. So first of all, we're going to use these names: txt this, btn that, mnu this, lbu that. We're going to create a menu strip with an open and exit menu option. So that's what we're referring to here in the second figure. When you click exit, it should terminate the program. When you click open, it should open up a file dialog that allows the user to select a automobile database. We're going to display a file dialog, and then if the user clicks the open menu when the user clicks the open menu option, once the file is selected, the text database of automobile data must be loaded into a structure array called automobile data, and the last index is going to be 4. So in other words, since it starts at 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's a total of 5 cars. And the members of the structure are going to be make, model, mpg, cylinders, and horsepower. Now, if data is changed in any text box, so for example, if I were to replace this word Camry with Corolla, as soon as I finish typing this data, it should immediately, when I leave that text box, save that data to the text file. So there is no save button, as you can see here. As soon as I change the data and leave the text box, that is, the data is automatically saved. And you'll also notice that the buttons are initially disabled until I open a database, and then once I've opened it, then the buttons are enabled so that they're ready to view the next record. Okay, so let's take a look at the graphical user interface. Let me just go ahead and show you what I've done. Well, first of all, I had to drag and drop a menu strip. So what I did was, in this section over here where it says menus and toolbars, I dragged this menu strip on top of the form. Well, in fact, let me just go ahead and pin this down so you can see what I did. So I dragged and dropped the menu strip over here, and then that's going to create this guy over here, which in essence is this menu strip. From here you can type file, menu, or file open, the hyphen, and then exit. Now you'll notice that in front of the letter F, let me click this once here, in front of the letter F I have an asterisk. Actually, that's not an asterisk, that's an ampersand. And the ampersand is going to be used for the alternate keyboard shortcut. So if the user hits Alt F, it's the same thing as if I were to click the file menu option. For open, you'll notice I did something similar. I placed the ampersand in front of the letter O. Now here, for exit, I enter the ampersand in front of the letter X. This over here is nothing more than entering a single hyphen inside of where it said text or type here. It said type here originally. I put a hyphen and then press enter, and that basically creates a separator. In terms of the names, you'll see that I created, when I select the file menu, I call that mnu file. This is going to be called mnu open. This is going to be called mnu exit. Okay? Get rid of the minimize and the maximize button. We have several text boxes, so this is going to be txt make, txt model, txt mpg, txt cylinders, and txt horsepower. This button over here, we're going to have that represent our btn previous button. This button is going to be our btn next button. And then I'm going to place a label with a fixed single border style right in the middle here of the two buttons. The text property will be 0. And I'm going to call this LBL record number. So whatever record that we're looking at, this is going to give us the appropriate number for that record. Now, I want you to also drag and drop an open file dialog. So take one of these guys over here in the dialog section and drag and drop that over here in this section. And whatever the name is, you're going to change that to OpenFD. So now this is going to be the file dialog that displays when the user clicks File and then Open. Okay, so let me run the program so I can give you a demonstration of what this is supposed to look like. All right, now you'll notice that when I click File and then Open, a file dialog opens up. So that's great. Now I have a way of looking for the data that I want to investigate. So for example, let's say that the data is inside of my flash drive and I want to go to the appropriate section so I can find that. And here's the data right here. So I open up this text database and now the buttons are alive. I can now click to go to the next record till finally I get to the last one. I can click the previous button to go back to the first record. If I change data, for example, if I change this to Camry, okay, so I type Camry, and then I'm going to go to the next record. All right, let me go back to that first record again, and you'll see that Camry is retained. Now, if I were to close this, and if I were to look at the actual data on that text file, you'll see that it has actually written over the file, and is going to maintain that data. In fact, why don't we do that? So what I did was I can just give you a quick preview of what my database looks like. Let's see here. So let me go to Citrus College. And if I were to show you, all right, so what I did was I created an automobiles.txt file, and all I did was simply use all programs here. Let's see, I went to accessories, and then I opened up Notepad, and then within Notepad, I just typed all this data. So you'll see that this is the record for one automobile. This is the record for another automobile. And you'll see that I have make, model, miles per gallon, number of cylinders, and then the horsepower. I press enter, and then I go to the next item. And so this database is comma delimited. It's separated by commas. And again, I call it automobiles text. That's where I'm going to be drawing the data from, and I'm going to be placing that back into my application here that I'm creating. Okay, well, probably the first thing to do, the easiest thing to do, is to create the code for the exit button. So if I double-click MNU exit, you'll see that that's nothing more than me.close. So that's going to close the application. I think we're ready for the next item, and that's going to be when the user clicks the Open menu option. So let me double-click MNU Open, and that takes me over here. Now, I'm going to put a breakpoint over here to remind me that this is where I need to return. I think it's probably important for me to show you what happens at the beginning of the program. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a structure as requested on the handout. Now, a structure, as you'll recall, is just simply a group of data. So I have a bunch of items. I have some strings, I have a double, I have a couple of integers. Now, a combination of these whole items, we're going to call that automobile data. It would be, for example, of me if I said, I'm going to create a structure called the Solis family. Well, if there was the Solis family, then I'd have over here, I'd have a son, wife, I'd have all the items that make up the Solis family. Well, that's exactly what this is doing. This group of data, which we call a structure, and the name of it is going to be automobile data, basically has these 5 members. Okay, so now I have a way of tracking or storing the make, the model, MPG, so forth and so on. But here's the thing. I want to make an array of this structure because I have 5 cars that I need to keep track of their make, model, MPG, cylinders, and horsepower. So in the process of getting ready to establish an array, I'm going to establish a constant where the last index is 4. And so when I instantiate, or rather when I create this array called car array, the last index is 4, the first index we know is 0, so that's a total of 5 cars. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now notice what I said. This is an array of automobile data. So in other words, this is an array of structures. This is an array specifically of this structure. It's got 5 of these is basically what's happening at this line. I'm going to have to keep track of the record index, right? So right now the first record, we're going to call that 0. So I'll go ahead and establish the record index as an integer. I need to keep track of the file name eventually because I'm going to have to actually open a file to obtain the data from it. So I better keep track of that file name. And then I'm also going to create a Boolean variable called loading. And I'll explain that later on in the video. Okay, so now we can return back over here to MNU open. And I want to create a title. In fact, let me go ahead and run the program so you can see what it looks like. So if I run this, see that I have a title on the top of the dialog when it opens up. Oh, sorry, it's stopping right here, so let me go ahead and remove this break and click play. All right, here it is. So we're going to open a database file. Well, that's exactly what I said for this thing to display, right? Open the database file, there it is. And then I have a filter, specifically it's looking for text files. And once I find that text file, I can double click it and it's going to load the data. Okay, so I have a title, I also have a filter. Now, I want to keep track of every single row of data. Here's what I mean by that. If I were to take a look, say for example, at this text file, this is a row of data from here to here, right? Those 5 items, that's one row. Well, I want to keep track of that row using this array of strings. So this is an array of strings called current row. So the current row is going to take a look at this data. Then current row is going to be equal to this. Then current row is going to be equal to this, and so forth and so on. So current row is going to be each of these different lines, and we're going to be able to pull out the items from current row, specifically the make, the model, the miles per gallon, the cylinders, and then of course horsepower. So later on you'll see how this is going to work. Okay, I use an if statement to say, first of all, when I open the file dialog, it could be that the user clicks cancel. So in other words, let's say that I go ahead and click file open, and then when the dialog opens up I decide, no, I'm going to cancel. So I click cancel over here. Well, what this is doing is it's saying if the user clicks cancel, then exit this sub. We're not going to do the rest of the stuff when the user clicks the open menu option. We're simply going to exit the sub because the user clicked the cancel button. But if they didn't click cancel, well then we're going to need to obtain the file name. So in other words, again, let me run the program. When the user clicks file and then open, and then when they select a file, and then when they click open, as soon as they click open, first of all, we're going to have to obtain that file name. So whatever the file name is that you have all your text data, let's obtain that. Now I was checking out Microsoft's website to find out how they recommend to read data from a text file. And so what they're going to have you do is this. They're going to have you create a text field parser. And this is what you do. First of all, you, in this case, go ahead and type dim in my reader, and then type as a new Microsoft Visual Basic File I/O text field parser. And then we're going to give it whatever the name is that was selected by the user in the file dialog. Now, by doing this, we're going to be able to pull each of the different parts of every record. So what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to pull the first part and the second part. Well, notice that all these different parts are separated by commas. This thing is comma delimited. So I'm going to use that. Over here, I'm going to say, first of all, my reader, what is the text field type? Well, this thing is a delimited text field type. And that's the great thing about this particular approach. I can say, well, since everything is comma delimited, or since everything is delimited rather, I can now indicate how it's delimited. And in this case, I'm saying it's comma delimited. In other words, these 3 lines establish communication with an external file. And then these 2 lines identify to Visual Basic that this thing is delimited. Specifically, it's comma delimited. So in other words, the text is separated by commas. Well, once I have that, I'll go ahead and set the record index to 0 because my intention is to later on indicate, or just to display that first record right here. We'll call this record 0, this is record 1, this is record 2, so forth and so on. Okay, within the while statement, and this is a special while statement, it says while not, while this is not the case. In other words, while we have not finished reading the end of data. See, because what's going to happen is first we're going to read this record and we're going to do something with it. Then we're going to read this record and do something with it, so forth and so on. So while we haven't read all the data, once we get to this last line and we've read all this data, finally that while statement will be false. So that's what this statement is about. We're now going to use a try block. And what the try block is going to do is, first of all, it's going to say, within my reader there is a procedure, or there's a function rather, that's called read fields. So what this thing is going to do is it's basically going to read this one line of data right here, all the fields. So it'll read this data, Camry 36, and then 150. Okay, so once I've read those, it's going to place them into current row. So current row at this point is equal to this, Toyota Camry 36, 150, with all the commas in between. It's basically what I've highlighted. That's going to be in here. Well, these next 5 lines are going to pick specifically within this selection. The first part is Camry, that's the make. The Toyota rather. The next part is Camry, that's the make of the model rather, and then 30 miles per gallon, 6 cylinders, and 150 horsepower. So that's what these lines do. So since our record index is 0, we're going to put this into the car array dot make, because remember this is an array of structures, and specifically row, give me the 0 index information. Well, the 0 index information is the word Toyota. So Toyota is going to be placed into here. And then for the current row, which remember the current row is equal to this whole thing, but specifically I'm looking for the 1 index. Well, let me see, this is the 0 index. This is the 1 index. Oh, that's the word Camry. So we're going to place the word Camry into the model of this car array element. And then we take a look at the current array, which is this whole thing, but specifically I'm looking for the second index information. Well, this is 0, this is 1, this is 2. Okay, so this is the 2 index information. So the number 30 now, that's what this whole thing is placed into the miles per gallon for this car array element. Okay, so that's how this whole thing works right here. Well, now that this has happened, let's get ready for obtaining the next record of data, which in this case is Toyota Sentra 354-175. Okay, so in order to do that, we're going to increment the record index to get ready for that next record, and we're going to go back over here, and while we have not reached the end of the data from my reader, we haven't because we're reading the second record right here, so we're going to go through this whole process again. If for whatever reason there's some sort of strange line, this is what Microsoft recommends. They say catch EX as, and then you're probably going to have to retype this, as a Microsoft Visual Basic File I/O malform line exception. So in other words, if something happens, what this message box is going to do is it's going to display what that actual message is in terms of why the data that was not able to be captured, why it's inappropriate. Okay, so this is just a standard try block. Once we've obtained all the data from the database record or the database file, now we're going to go ahead and populate the text data into with the first record. So all these text boxes over here, let me go back over here, these text boxes now have to be populated with the first record, which you can see Toyota Camry 36 and 150 need to populate these text boxes. Well, that's what this code does. That's our first record, so we're going to call that record index 0. So now what I'm going to do is this. Let's go ahead and populate the text boxes with all the records. Okay. Well, for the txt make, which is this text box over here, this one right here, that needs to be populated with the car array 0 make. So in other words, the zeros right here for car array, car array, car array. Remember, the 0 is that first index, or that the first element, right? Because the 0 index is the first element. So for that particular car, let's obtain the make. Let's obtain the model. Let's obtain the MPG, cylinders, and horsepower, and let's place them into the text boxes. Well, that's what this section does. All right, I haven't mentioned yet what loading represents, and I will in a bit. So for right now, just put loading is equal to false. And then we're also going to have to keep track of the label. So the label down here, it needs to increment as I click this button, and needs to decrement as I click this button. All right, well, since this is the first time that we're loading data into it, it's going to, as you can see, it's going to be 0. So 0 is going to be placed into the text property of the label. All right. Now we're ready to activate these two buttons. So at first these two should be disabled, but now that we've loaded the data from the database file, let's go ahead and enable those. And then finally, when you're finished, let's close the MyReader object, which was, as you can see, a text field parser. So whatever you open, you must close. And so now let's close the line of communication with that external file. Okay, so that takes care of MNU open. All right, now let's see what happens when the user clicks the next button. So they click this button over here, and notice what we're going to do. First of all, I only want to display data up to that last index, right? So record index is 0, that's the first record. Then it's going to be 1, 2, 3, and 4. Well, as long as this number is less than last index, then we can display it. Once it's greater than or equal to, then it's not going to display the data. So if I'm clicking this button over here, and if this is 0, if I'm clicking this button, this better go to 1. And that's what this next statement does. Record index is going to be incremented by 1, and then we're going to display it in the label. So once it's increased, this is going to be the label that changes to number 1. All right. Now, we are loading data from this text file. Specifically, we're going to load this data. So I set the loading Boolean variable to true. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in just a moment. Well, now that I have all the data, I'm just going to go ahead and place all of these items here into the text boxes. So let's go ahead and populate these text boxes with the data from record number 2. Now remember, all these items are inside of our car array, which is an array of array of structures, I should say. So record index is going to be equal to 1. If it was 0 previously, add 1 to it, so now it's going to be 1. So now we're taking a look at this record, Toyota Sentra 354175. Okay, so now the make, model, MPG cylinders, horsepower is now placed into the text box for the next record, namely this one over here, the one that's incremented by 1. And now we are finished loading the text boxes. And that's it for the BTN text, or the BTN next click. In a similar fashion, if the user clicks the previous button, so we have the code for that, which is almost identical to next, except that it's going to say if the record index, as long as the record index is greater than 0. If that's the case, then we can keep on decrementing the record index. So we can go from 4 to 3 to 2 to 1. That's okay. What we're going to do then is, as this thing changes, this label should also change, and so that's why we have this statement over here that says that first let's decrement it, and then whatever record index is, let's place that in the label. We are about to load data into the text box, and then when we're finished loading the data in the text box, we're going to stop loading. And that's what all these text box statements do. So they take the items from the car array of structures. Specifically, we're going to take the make, model, MPG cylinders, and horsepower and place them into the text boxes. Okay, well, I don't have a save button. So what's going to happen is, as soon as the user finishes typing data, I want that to save automatically into the text file, or to the database text file. So let me double click the text box. When I double click the text box, that takes me to the text changed the text change procedure. So txt make underscore text change is what happens. This is where we go to when the user makes some sort of a change in the text box. All right, so if we're going to make some sort of a change, well, the first thing I'm going to do is ask the question, well, first of all, are we loading? Because you know how when we're loading, let me go back over here, let's say when the user opens the menu, and now that we've opened the menu and we've obtained, we're about to open up the database, okay, so we're going to place that into our array of structures, and then we're going to populate the text box data. Well, before this thing, when we first opened it up, it's going to be blank. Well, now it's about to be placed with the first little tidbit of information, which in this case is going to be Toyota. That's going to be placed into the txt make text. Camry is going to be placed over here. So these text boxes are about to be changed. Well, remember, when those text boxes change, then they go to this procedure right here, txt make text change. Well, I don't want anything to happen if we're loading the data initially. So that's why I said, hey, if loading is equal to false, then do this. But if loading is equal to true, then I don't want to do these two statements. Now you understand why I created a loading variable that says, hey, if we're loading, then whenever text is changed, ignore this because we're just simply loading data. But once I finish loading the data, okay, now you can go ahead and consider any changes. So let's say that I've run the program here. Let's say that I load the data from a text file. Okay, so here's all the items that we have here. We have a total of 5 cars, and I change this over here to Centra. And I go to the next record. So I have 2 Centras now. Okay, let me close this. And let me reopen this. And again, I'm going to open up that same text file. And remember we just changed it to Centra? Isn't that nice? It remembered it because it wrote this information to the text file. Okay, so anytime that there is a change, anytime that I change this, for example, back to Corolla, okay, and I'm going to hit Tab to go to the next field. Hey, I just left this field, something changed. In fact, let me do this. Let me prove it to you. So I want to stop the code anytime that there is a change to txt make. Let's see what happens. So let me go ahead and run the code. And specifically, I'm going to open up the database of automobiles text. All right, look at this. We haven't even finished loading the data, and already txt make change is about to is affected because why? We're about to place something into the text property of this text box. So that's a change. So this procedure activates. But remember, I'm loading the data. So because I'm loading the data, I don't care about making any type of adjustments. I'm really just loading the data. So watch what happens now when I skip into, since loading is equal to true, right, because I'm loading data, let's ignore these 2 statements, and we can just simply go on from here with the rest of the code. Okay? All right, so anytime that I change data for these 5 text boxes, you'll see that I have procedures for those. So here's txt model. Here's txt mpg, txt cylinders, and txt horsepower. So I have all of these procedures for when the text changes for the text box. Now, if we're not loading, then what are we going to do? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to take the text in that text box, and we're going to update our array, car array, with the new data. So that way we keep track of it. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to call a procedure called write car data, and we're going to send it the car array by reference, and I'm also going to send the name of the file so that we know where to write this thing to. So let's go ahead and take a look at the write car data procedure. So I'm going to go up here a little bit. Here it is. So this is the procedure for write car. And so notice what I'm going to do is I'm going to send the array, first of all, the array of structures. Notice that I'm sending this by ref. And the reason why I'm going to send this by reference is I want to send the original. I don't want to send a copy. I want the original to be updated. So that's why I send this thing by ref, which in essence is basically sending the address of this array of structures. So the way that I'm going to do that is by ref array, and so you have to put your open and close parentheses over here. And what is this array parameter? Well, it's basically an automobile day array of data structures. Okay, and I'm also going to send the file name of the file where this thing is actually located. Okay, well once I've done that, then I could just simply create an object writer. And so the way that I do that is as follows: dim object writer. This is the name of the object that I gave it. As new system.io.streamWriter, and then whatever the file name is. All right, I'm going to keep track of the data because I have to write that all of this data to the text file. So that means a looping structure, so therefore I have to have a counter. Within a for loop, I'm going to say for counter is equal to 0 to last index. And what I'm about to do here now is to write all of the data. So with that object writer dot write line, what this is going to do is it's going to write a single line of data. In essence, it's writing this first line of data. So how's it going to do that? Well, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this car array, and specifically counter is 0 at this point, so it's car array 0.make. Then I want to add a comma. So first of all, it looks like it added the word Toyota, and then a comma. And then let's say that I change this to Sentra, right? So the car array 0.model, let's say that this were Sentra, so this would be updated with the word Sentra. And then if I made any changes to the, well, first it displays a comma, and then after that if I made any changes to the MPG, or if I made any changes to the cylinders, or to the horsepower, if I made any of those changes, it would get written onto this file. Finally, I'm going to send out a VB new line, and that means go to the beginning of the next line, and then I'm going to consider the next iteration of column equal to 1, then column equal to 2, all the way up to column equal to 4. So in essence, what's happening is this is going to write the first line, then it's going to rewrite the second line. Now, the data may be exactly the same, but this is the way it's going to just write to the entire database just to make sure that everything is updated properly. All right, so this is Professor Robert Solis. I hope this video lesson has been helpful. Have a good day. We'll see you next time.